Alright, hello and welcome finally to the primary weapons review going into 2018. So, small disclaimer at the beginning of this, damage 2.5 has not happened yet, and I will most likely have to redo this video when that does happen. For that reason, the secondary and melee reviews are going to be delayed until that happens. However, we are also going to be doing the Warframe full roster review very, very soon, so please look forward to that. Sorry I'm delaying the other two videos, but it is a really gigantic amount of work to not just redo, say, this video, and redo all of them if damage 2.5 really shakes up everything, which it very well could. So with that, let's get started. And let's get started by talking about our rankings. So we have 4 rankings. We have the starters. Starters are weapons that are good for new players who are going through the star chart. These are weapons to shoot for that are very, very good and are going to carry you or be very useful tools. Beyond that, we have the good category. These weapons are fine. Some of them require a bit too much investment, I think, for what they can output for you, and are, in general, maybe outclassed in some areas, but they're not bad by any means. Pretty much all the weapons in this category can handle Sortie 3 with few to no issues. And, next rank up, we have Great. Great weapons are just that. They are fantastic. They are the top of the food chain, almost. The only thing above great weapons is the top 10, which, if you remember last year's video, you know that this has been expanded. Last year we had a top 5. This year we have a top 10 because there are so many more primaries that are worth using and in close competition with one another, which in general is just a very good thing. There are a lot more really good weapons, some of them being snipers. Shock and fucking surprise. That is how this ranking is going to go. I think it will be a good way to show where things are right now in general. And of course, I will give more details on each weapon as we go through them. So with that, let's just get started. All right, first up in our good category is the Amprex. So this weapon can do a lot, but it's going to ask a lot of you. It has ammo troubles, so at the very least, you're going to be bringing carrier with this weapon, which is not a huge ask for a lot of people, but also this weapon is Forma intensive. It is very hard to get away with a build that is less than 4 Forma on the Amprex, and that can be trouble for a lot of people. So while this weapon, in combination with certain Warframes, mainly Warframes that are able to buff the damage of their weapons, and it can do a lot with those Warframes, in general, it's not something that I would recommend to, say, everybody, but there is a reason people enjoy this weapon, because they love shooting fucking lightning at enemies and watching them evaporate. So, if that's your cup of tea, this is going to be a thing you're going to enjoy a lot. In the same vein of evaporating motherfuckers, the Arcaplasmor has that in spades. This weapon does a absolutely tremendous amount of damage. It fucking hurts. It's a shotgun, and all shotguns, with the exception of, let's say, one, are incredible in this game. They are out fucking standing, and this one has innate punch through, and it's an AoE, and it's critically based, and it has an insanely easy time getting headshots with those crits. The list goes on and on for reasons you would want to be using the Arcaplasmor. The only trouble with this weapon is because it is not many pellet based and it is a wave instead, it does not work as well with Hunter munitions. And because of that, it has some very slight troubles starting out at about level 120, where it is not noticeable except on heavies, and ending at about level 140 or so, where it starts being really noticeable that certain enemies aren't dying in one shot. Of course, I just said that enemies over level 100 start not dying in one shot, which should tell you a lot about how good this weapon is. If you want to evaporate some motherfuckers, if you want to kill them real good, and also have the constant CC from the staggers on this weapon and anything that doesn't die in one hit, look no further. Basically, look no further than this. It's fantastic. On the other hand, we have the Argan Ack. The Argan Ack is a weapon that, if it was 4 MR lower, I'd be like, yeah, pick this up, absolutely. There's no reason not. If 4 MR lower, sure. But at MR 7, this weapon can't compete. It doesn't have the stats to back it up. And while this weapon's gimmick is cool, I don't think it's actually very useful, and I think in a lot of cases players would find it nauseating with the extra zoom. With that, You could use this, but there's never a reason to because it just gets outperformed by everything and it's MR fodder. In direct comparison with that, we have our first top 10. The Astala comes in at number 6. This weapon is also the exact same MR as the Argan Ack, and the difference is clear. This weapon is considered a shotgun, but has considerable range, and also has a big AoE explosion. Oh, it's also slash-based, it's critical-based, or you can build it critically-based, with hunter munitions to even enhance more slash procs on this motherfucker. It scales into really high levels because of the slash. Level 150 enemies go down quite quickly with this. The list goes on and on. This weapon is capable of accidentally... I accidentally a room of motherfuckers. I accidentally pulled the trigger once and everyone in that room is fucking dead. Whoops. My bad. That is the kind of weapon you're dealing with here, and barring some slight ammo conservation issues, if you're incredibly trigger happy, which... in general, you really don't need to be. One shot is more than enough for the majority of enemies in the game. It is exceptional. It is really fighting with its competitors around the number 6 slot, so there's going to be a lot of give or take on where this actually belongs in the top 10, but it is an exceptional weapon that it's just been fantastic. In that same vein, another weapon that is very good, but unfortunately only good, the Attica. So this weapon is really good for bow-only sorties, where you can't take something else. That being said, this weapon is no slouch, and given just a little bit of forma, you can make this your absolute go-to for those bow-only sorties, because it does considerable damage. With that, utilizing hunting munitions on this weapon is incredibly effective, and I would highly suggest it if you can get a hold of that mod, which there are tons of copies of, so just ask somebody if you don't have a hunter munitions, and this weapon will just be fit as a fiddle, and very enjoyable to use for a bow. Keeping the train rolling with great weapons, we have the Baza. So the Baza is the first submachine gun in Warframe, and I know some of you are going to say, okay, well what about the Gurkata? The Gurkata's like the same size as this. I'm determining that this is the first submachine gun based entirely on how it has its fall off, because it is a short-range weapon. That being said, this weapon also has a very niche use in being the de facto Ivara weapon, I would say, and in general is very competitive with the other high fire rate assault rifle type weapons in the game, such as Soma Prime, such as the Prisma Gurkata, etc., etc. It is very, very good, and finding a niche as a silent weapon gives it a little bit of an edge even. Alright, the Boar. So the Boar comes with a disclaimer. It is a starter weapon. If you do not get this before Uranus, it is, and at Uranus it's probably fine, but the thing you really want to do is run into this thing on Earth. There is one underwater tile set on Earth, and you can get this thing, and it is very, very good early on in the game. That being said, I know that's unlikely, but... and it's not super unlikely, because you should be doing that underwater mission to get mobilized and stuff, but I know a lot of people aren't. If you get a Boar early on, use it. It's a really good weapon for starters. God, like, it's a really good starter-off shotgun. No reason to not grab this if you can get it early enough. And then we have the Boar Prime, the big brother. This weapon is good. The main problem with this weapon is that shotguns are so fucking insane, so comparing it across its own class of shotguns where this weapon has ammo problems, even though this weapon can get to the faded 100% status before multi-shot four shotguns, it's just, it doesn't, like, have the damage, and it's not slash-based, so the status is not as good. Like, it's fine, it's serviceable. You can use this, but it has a little bit of ammo problem stuff. And for a shotgun, it's low end. Does that mean it's bad? No, we're just comparing it to some of the greatest weapons in the game, so it gets a little bit of a hard time. The Boltor, another weapon in the starter category. This is literally given to you from a junction. There's no reason for a new player to not build this. It helps a lot against Grineer whenever you have like little to no mods. I would just suggest you build this. You're going to get it for free. Just put the materials in it, let it cook, take it out, use it as a beginner weapon before you get a few other things. Definitely a way to go with this weapon. It's the way you should definitely go, I think, starting out. Obviously, for high-end players, totally useless. All right, so this is the Boltor Prime. The Boltor Prime is a weapon that is beloved by many. Many. But I'm only going to call this weapon good, and it has a caveat. So this weapon is only good if you can get it before MR5. If you can't get it before MR5, I'm going to consider this weapon MR fodder. There are weapons that are a lot better than this, and I know people have that nostalgia for this weapon whenever it was the best weapon in the game, which that was a point that existed, but that point is long gone. Not having good critical chance and having this low status chance is just, in general, no longer acceptable for, like, the higher end, and this weapon barely X by getting into the good category if you can acquire it early, because the master rank is technically very low. Acquiring it may be a bit of a challenge, though. The Bratton. You can start the game with the Mark 1 Bratton. This is a good weapon to immediately grab after it and level this. It's like a decent one for a starter. The stepping stone between the Mark 1 Bratton, you have this, and then you have the Volcker. It's a very easy 3-step program for beginners. You should pick this up. Not much more to be said. It's not that much different than the Mark 1, and it's incredibly similar, but it's like a decent thing to grab early. On the other hand, we also have the Bratton Prime. If you really, really love the Bratton early on, you should definitely go for this. This weapon is decent. It's not like the top of the good category or anything, but if you really like a very basic assault rifle, you could do worse. You could definitely do worse than the Bratton Prime. You can go many different ways with this, no matter kind of what mods you have access to. You can do a fully elemental build, it'll be alright. You could do a hybrid crypt build, it'll be alright. You can kind of go any which way you want with mods on this weapon, and it'll be decently successful. Want to go 100 munitions? You can do that. Slash based by default, like, it's alright. On the other hand, we have a series of weapons that people will notice I've completely turned around on. Bratton Prime is MR fodder. It's just not worth building. Plain and simple. Even though the visual update to this weapon is beautiful, it's just not worth picking up. Like, you're already going to have better things than this by the time you would move on to this, I think. Unless you absolutely have, like, the biggest hard-on ever for burst weapons, just nah. In the exact same vein, the Bratton Prime. The Bratton Prime has just gotten worse because crits are so much better now, and also the augment for this weapon, it just doesn't do enough to help it anymore. Putting this weapon also at unfortunate MR fodder. That being said, again, disclaimer, if you have a gigantic hard-on for burst weapons, you will probably use this anyway. The Buzzlock. So this weapon is gimmicky and absolutely not worth getting. Coming in at Master Rank 9, you could kill enemies with this, but also it's fucking Master Rank 9. You have weapons that are way better than this by the time you're Master Rank 9, at least I hope so, because you'd have to have leveled tons and tons of weapons, and the likelihood of you not at some point leveling something better than this is just exceedingly low. So while this weapon may be some good goofy fun, and it can kill things, it's just not worth it in general, and it's MR fodder. The Sybaris, get a Paris Prime. It's mastery fodder. The Sybaris Prime, the gimmick on this weapon is actually a downside. Having the spread is not useful for a bow. All the bows in the game right now are just about doing really high single target damage. Barring that, this doesn't do really high multi-target damage, so why would you ever use it? You're not using a fucking bow because it's a shotgun, which is what this thing is trying to be. It's just mastery fodder. The Convectrix. I don't know if I have words in the English language that can describe exactly how terrible this thing is. Alright, a nice change of pace. A new weapon. It's number 7 on our top 10, the Corinth. This weapon does a lot of fucking damage. It does a lot of damage. It does many damages, and it has its secondary fire with airburst for clearing groups. Now, this weapon, I debated strongly whether or not this should be in front of the Astala or not. Like, one way or the other, 6 and 7, Corinth Astala. They're in there somewhere, and it's really hard for me to choose. Because this weapon is a tad clunky, but can do some very impressive single target damage, whereas the Astala's is slightly less impressive. So, it's a very, very strong weapon, and I like it a lot, but like, it's just a really strong shotgun that has a pretty solid alt fire, and there's not a whole lot exciting about it besides its outstanding sound. But that's all it needs, really. Just has to be an exceptionally good shotgun, which it definitely is. Even in the realm of shotguns, it's quite good. Daikyu. So this weapon got buffed. Not enough. It is mastery fodder still. It is too fucking slow. Like, it is just so slow and not worth using. Like, most bows aren't worth using, and having a bow that is slow, even for a bow, is just insanity to me still. Like, this thing, you could kill a guy with this, and then the 40 other guys around you are going to be killing you. So maybe steer clear. Maybe wait for Daikyu Prime. Maybe it'll be a little faster. The Dara, also a series of weapons that I have turned around a little bit on. These weapons just aren't good enough anymore. They have terrible crit chance, and the status chance just isn't enough comparative to what else is available at the current time, making this mastery fodder, and very similarly, making the Dara Vandal mastery fodder. It is very slightly better, of course, but it's just not enough. On the other hand, we have the Dex Sybaris. The Dex Sybaris is a very, very good weapon. The only thing holding this weapon back is that you don't get to choose when you get it. It is at one point in the year. If you get it very, very early as a newish player, it's going to be an outstanding, amazing thing for you. If you get it like mid to late, there's a point where its cousin, Sybaris Prime, is maybe going to be a lot more worth it to you. But this weapon is good in its own right, and there's no reason to not use it. It was a very enjoyable weapon to level and put the forma that I did into it, and of course it is beautiful. But those things don't put it above its brother, and whenever we're looking at investment and how hard things are to get and all that, it's just fine in the end. Now, controversially, there will be some people that think that this weapon belongs in good. But I would remind those people that this weapon is not worth investing anything into because it is a component of the Tsar. This is the definition of a level and forget weapon because you're turning it into a much better weapon known as the Tsar. So this is pretty much the only shotgun that is going to get a mastery fodder. The Dread. The Dread has been around a long time, and shock and surprise, it's still great. That shouldn't surprise anyone, really. This thing got a little bit of a bump from Hunter Munitions just because you have the ability to add another mod that can give you even more consistency on your slash procs with this. The basic gist of the Dread is you're going to do a lot of critical damage, and that's going to turn into a slash proc, and when that turns into a slash proc, whatever you slash procced fucking evaporates. If that doesn't sound good, then how about you can get this weapon very early. This weapon has the highest drop rate from Stalker, so it's likely that a newer player will get this pretty early on, given that this thing has a fucking 75% chance to drop from the Stalker. You can get it, like, way earlier than you probably should be able to for the power this thing can put out, and this weapon is definitely great. Now, this might be kind of a weird one, and it might be a little bit of my bias showing, but the Ferox is number 8 on my top 10 list. This weapon, with Hunter Munitions, with like the new stuff that's come out, is exceptionally good, and its gimmick isn't bad, which it's the only gun staff that does not have kind of a shitty gimmick. So that gives it a pretty good bump. Being a faster firing, slightly less damage Opticore, that it obviously doesn't have the slight AoE of the Opticore. That is really, really good. Like, the punch through, like, the list goes on of reasons that I really, really like this weapon. And I will say, if there's anything on my top 10 that is biased, it's this. But, like, it's a really good weapon. It's underrated. I think it's underrated. Things that are not underrated, the Flux Rifle. This is garbage. You know what? This is a weapon where I'm going to mention this. Rivens, no matter what you roll, no matter how high the stats are on a Riven, it will not make this weapon good. It will not. This weapon can't be saved. I tried to do that because I like the Flux Rifle. Because back in the day, back when beam weapons were hype as shit, this weapon was really good. That is no longer the case. It will probably never be good again. The Galaxian, in keeping with the theme that beam weapons are garbage, is mastery fodder. Obviously, earlier we had the Amprex, which is more of the exception than the rule, but pretty much all the beam weapons in the game are not very good. Galaxian is a shining example of that. This weapon got buffed and it's still not good enough. The Gorgon. So the Gorgon series of weapons, there are people that love them, And I gotta say, I wish I could, but they're just mastery fodder. They're just not good enough. They can't stack up to just everything else around them, really, and they're just not worth putting the investment into, or any of that stuff. Obviously, that goes for the Gorgon Wraith as well, also mastery fodder. On a different note, this is a Grikata. The Grikata is an incredible weapon for new players, given that you get a vital sense from a mission, which is not going to be everybody. And also, you can ask a veteran player who probably has about like 130 vital senses lying around, and they might just give you one. So they'll probably just give you one if you ask nicely. For a new player, grabbing a Grikata is like a discount Soma, and you can get this right away, whereas you cannot get a Soma right away. So you should probably grab this as a new player if you're looking to use a crit weapon. Also, if you happen to be grabbing 100 munitions also, an early utilization of crits on this weapon and 100 munitions is kind of devastating. Things that are not kind of devastating. The Grinlock is garbage. There's just so many problems. Where do I even begin with the problems with this weapon? It's a slow-firing status weapon that doesn't have enough crit to be relevant, and it's just bad. It's just bad all the way around. It's not worth building. The master rank is too high, even for what it does. Like, it's just all problems. Mastery fodder. Again, thankfully, flipping the script a little bit on that, is the Hardpack. The Hardpack is an exceptionally good weapon for beginners, and if you don't grab a Vital Sense, this is definitely the weapon I would gravitate towards. So, this weapon has a few advantages for new players. In general, it is just a good gun to, like, if you're going to shoot man, this is a good thing to pick up early. It's very easy to build, it does good damage, and it has a gimmick. So, the gimmick of this weapon on the alt fire is that you shoot a harpoon at a motherfucker, and you pull them off their feet. This is exceptionally useful to newer players, because sometimes as a newer player, you don't have the damage to kill that guy, but what you do have is a harpoon, and fuck that guy, he can't shoot at you because he tripped, fuck him. And that's like basically why I would suggest this to new players, is because it can problem solve for you while also being a very serviceable weapon. No surprise, this is on the top 10. This is the Heck. It is number 5 on the top 10 list, and it is the same as it was last year, almost to a T. This weapon has probably the single best augment for any weapon in the entire game. It has outstanding damage. You can get it at fucking Mastery Rank 4 for almost no materials. It's just, like, up, down, left, right, front, center. It's fucking powerful. Everybody should have a Heck. Whether you have the Vacor version of it, which you've invested a lot into, or whether you're just keeping it basic with just a regular Heck to destroy a motherfucker when they need to be destroyed, the Heck can do that for you. The Heck can kill a motherfucker for you when they need to die. So, get yourself a Heck. New players, this also applies to you. Get a Heck. It's MR4. It costs nothing. Everybody get a Heck. On the unfortunate, complete, and total opposite side of value, we have the Hema, which is an exceptionally difficult to acquire weapon unless you just join a clan that already has it researched, which is, at this point, it could happen. There's lots of clans that are probably not bothered with it, though, because it is so expensive, but this weapon is good still. It gets a little bit worse because of the recent meta shift and with how Hunter Munitions is making crits a lot more important in general with the primary weapons, but this weapon is good enough. It is very good status, and also, as a bonus, it can heal you, which is a very, very low count of weapons that can do that. This is the Hind. It looks like a baguette, so that you can be the French and fucking surrender. This weapon is abysmal. Do not use it. The Ignis. So, this is going to come as a little bit of a surprise, but this is mastery fodder. But stop yelling. I have a very good reason why the regular Ignis is mastery fodder. Comes at an MR4. The Ignis Wraith, at only 2 MR higher, is just a pure upgrade, and literally asking, like, almost any veteran player, they will just give you one of these blueprints. They, like, literally, anyone that is in my clan in particular, we can just print this and give this to whoever we want. So, wait 2 mastery ranks, and instead, get the very good Ignis Wraith. You can put the investment in this weapon, and it becomes an exceptionally good just AoE clear. Maybe not like Insanoflex, probably about the level of the Amprex, I would say, but if you like fire, there's pretty much nowhere else to go in realistic terms. So if you're looking for an Ignis, don't settle for the regular. Get the Wraith. The Javelock. So this might come as a surprise to a lot of people, but the Javelock is actually like pretty good now. It has some niche use cases with letting Ember light herself on fire for very little damage, which can activate Ember's passive, which using this to that effect is pretty effective. And in general, it got buffed to be pretty decent. So I'm going to put this thing in the good category. I think it kind of barely X into the good category, but I think it's useful there. Like, it's a decent weapon. It's okay. It's no Ferox, obviously. But if you are, like, an Ember main, certainly you will want this weapon around as a tool, just in general. And otherwise, it's not so bad. You can get away with using this thing. The Karak. Oh, how your time has come and gone. Unfortunately, this weapon is now mastery fodder. This series of weapons, the Karak and the Dara, once upon a time, were pretty good. They're pretty up there. But no longer. And of course, that goes for the Karak, which is mastery fodder, and the Karak Wraith, which is only slightly better, and also, sadly, because I really like the way this weapon looks, also mastery fodder. The Comb. So the Comb is good. Normally. Under normal circumstances, the Comb is good. It's a little ammo intensive. Gotta be a little careful. Can't just hold down the trigger for your entire life. You gotta have some fucking discipline. But if you got that, this weapon is good. This is actually, I think, maybe the only weapon where I'm going to mention this in a way, like whatever. Everyone knows that I don't like Rivens. But it is worth mentioning in the Comb's case that if you get a really good Riven for it, it becomes literally the best weapon in the game. Because if you can get this to 100% status, and like one other bonus and a minus that doesn't matter, you literally have the best weapon in the game because it is non-stop, infinite, max status / procs, fully automatic from hell. That is worth noting because this is like the only weapon that a Riven can do that to. So it is actually worth mentioning here, but without that insanity, without that insane luck, you're looking at a pretty alright weapon. This might come as a little bit of a surprise since the sniper rework, but I'm only going to consider the Lanka to be good. Is this the hardest hitting sniper rifle in the game? Yes. Is this slow as fuck? Yes. Is that acceptable? It depends. It really depends. In general, for you taking on the hordes, which is, you know, most of Warframe, the slow speed of this weapon just isn't good enough. It can do damage, yes, but it's just, like, the reload is not that snappy, it's got, like, a slow charge time. All these things compound to where you can have, like, a super format out Lanka in case there's, like, a boss enemy that really needs to go down, but also a lot of the other snipers can really take care of any boss enemy we currently have access to that would need that kind of damage, namely the Terrorists. The other snipers can handle that just fine. So, whereas Lanka is good, it's just too slow. The Latron series. So, the normal Latron is mastery fodder. It's not worth getting early on. However, the Latron Prime, and I'll be honest, I may be giving this gun a little bit of an easy time, but it makes it into good. With Hunter munitions, this does all right in testing. Personally, I hate all of the Latron series of weapons, which is why I'm saying I might be giving them like a little bit of an easy time in terms of like how harsh I'm grading them. But I'm going to say that the Latron Prime and also the Latron Wraith, they're incredibly similar, are good. I hate them. I hate both of them a lot. But they performed pretty well during the tests. Like, I might be giving them too much of an easy time. If you really love single-shot weapons, you're really gonna like the Latron series. I hate them. Things I don't hate, the Lens. So, the Lens is a weapon that did not make it onto my top 10, but it's so fucking close. It's so close. The Lens is an exceptional weapon. The gigantic AoE of this weapon, the amount of damage that it does, you can just slay with this. Also, given the inherent ammo converter, you're very, very unlikely to run out of ammo as long as you hit, like, 2 guys with the gigantic AoE this thing puts out. It's very powerful. The one thing holding this back is that if you don't hit the slash procs, it is a relatively early level that is going to give you a hard time in terms of heavily armored enemies. That being said, that's not a huge disadvantage, but it's the thing that barely pushes this out of my top 10. I really, really like this weapon. The Miter. The Miter, in my opinion, is good. This weapon, I think, is underrated because a lot of people just get it, level it, and then turn it into a Panthera, which I think is personally a mistake. This weapon, just out and out, on its own, given a build with slash, and given the exceptional status of this weapon, if you charge up a disc of this weapon and shoot it at an enemy, and you get a slash proc, even into the low hundreds, they will just die. And this weapon will bounce from target to target. And it also has a pretty good augment if you are in a situation where you hate nullifiers, which turns out there are a lot of Warframes that hate nullifiers. So I think the Miter is pretty good. I think it's definitely better than the weapon you build it into. It's underrated. I'm going to say the Miter is underrated in general. The Mark I Bratton. This is mastery fodder. You will be upgrading from it as soon as you possibly can after you start the game, or alternatively, you're going to have started with the Mark I Paris, and then you're going to buy this, level it as fast as you can, and then dump it, just for the mastery to get out of it, which is why, of course, this ranks as mastery fodder. Mark I Paris, the exact same situation, only reverse where I said Paris with where I said Bratton, and you probably get exactly what I'm going to say about this. The Mark I Strun, you can't start with this weapon, but you can pick it up out of the market, level it, and then chuck it, which is almost exactly what you're going to do. I don't think that there is a scenario where you're going to keep this weapon around, even as a new player. The Mutilus Serno. So, in last year's review, I said some okay things about this, and a lot of them were for the wrong reasons. This is a synergy weapon that, in some cases, can be useful, but in normal cases, where you're going to shoot a weapon at an enemy and you want to kill them, it doesn't perform great. It's okay at low-ish levels. It's even okay for some leveling nodes for like a couple waves, like Hydron. And if you have some form in it, it'll be all right for all of Hydron, I guess. But it's just not worth it, like to put form into this or anything like that. It's just not good enough. It's MR fodder. Alright, the Mutilus Quanta, also a gimmick weapon. So, for those that don't know, because I assume pretty much everybody doesn't, if you shoot the alt fire on this weapon, which is this infested bubble, and then switch to your operator and shoot through it to hit the terror list, it does get a damage bonus. But here's the thing about that. That is both not worth doing, and also just no. Like, it's so much set up for such nothing, and even, like, the bubble is, like, can be useful, I guess, but it's, like, I don't know, if weapon switch speed in the game was, like, suddenly sped up to, like, Devil May Cry levels, where you're, like, shooting a bubble with this, and then the Lex is in your hand, and you're shooting through that to utilize that, like, with a good weapon, then maybe. But in general, this weapon's just MR fodder. The Ogress. Oh, how I would love for this to not be mastery fodder. Alas, it is. Even the augment can't save it, sadly. It's a weapon you're more likely to kill yourself with than anything else, really. The Opticore. So, the Opticore. A lot of people on last year's video, they went to that video after this weapon got buffed. And it was very obvious that they had been enjoying the buffed version of this weapon, as they rightly should. This weapon is great. It is incredibly powerful. It is very comparable to the lens with slightly less AoE, but the charge time is less drastic. Hunter munitions, of course, etc., etc. There are a lot of reasons to use this weapon. It kills shit. That's like a primary reason. It's a pretty good one. I'm sure the second reason is that this thing is a goddamn Spartan laser. But it's a very good weapon that can output a very significant amount of damage at the current time. Can use Hunter munitions quite effectively, though it's got a slight inconsistency to it, and is generally just a very good weapon that you should definitely pick up and use. The Panthera, you probably can guess what I'm going to say about this weapon. It's not worth turning the Miter into this. It's just not good enough. Like, it's just not. Like, it's just not. Like, there's not much more to say than that. Like, sure, it's slash-based. Sure, you can get slash procs. I tried it with 100 munitions on the secondary fire. That's not worth it because the secondary fire is bad. You could shoot this at a guy, but also, why did you turn the miter into this? Is the basic question that you should ask yourself once you start using it. Because the miter, I think, is better than this, making this kind of de facto mastery fodder. The Parasist. So a lot of people justify this weapon by saying it is a slightly better hard pack. But here's the problem with that. The hard pack is for new players. This is positioned a little later, where the competition is, let's say, a little heavier, making this mastery fodder, unfortunately. Can you shoot things with this? Is it very slightly better than the hard pack? Yes. Does that justify the cost of this weapon and the mastery rank lock of this weapon? Absolutely not. The regular Paris. So the main problem with the regular Paris, and this is a weapon that you could consider a starter if you're really a big fan of bows, but the main problem with that is that the Paris Prime is so fucking easy to get. Like, literally, you're going to get this and level this, and probably if you go for it, by the time this thing hits level 30, you have a Paris Prime building. So, kind of just MR fodder for that exact reason. Like, you're going to get the strictly better version of this so fast if you want it. And here is the strictly better version of it. Shock and surprise, it's the next weapon we're talking about. It's good. This weapon, I might be grading a little harshly because I don't think very much of it as a bow because the dread exists, and also another weapon that's on the top 10 that we'll be talking about. But it is quite good early. It is quite good early. You can use it later. It's, like, for sure, this is definitely a weapon that you can use. Bow-only sortie? Absolutely. No reason to not use this toilet seat. But there's not a lot of reason to use it over other bows that are available. The dread, like I said earlier, it's not that hard to get. You're going to use it if you like it, is basically how this is going to boil down. The Penta, it's like, man, I remember a time whenever I was like, yeah, that weapon's pretty good. Nah, not anymore, man. This weapon's MR fodder. Everything, every variant of this weapon is MR fodder at the current time. It's just not good enough. The Phage, so this weapon does technically use shotgun mods, but it's not really a shotgun. It's like a gimmicky, how do I put this? This is a tentacle weapon that you jack off to reload it. And, like, that thing that I said might sound like hyperbole, but I'm very serious. It's a tentacle weapon, and you jack it to reload it. That's like literally what's up. That's 100% what this is. It's just like a silly meme weapon at this point, basically. And there was a time where this weapon was alright, which is even crazier, really. The Prisma Gorgon. So it's just, like I said earlier with the Gorgon series, it's just not worth investing in, and it's just not worth using in general. It's just not good enough. It's just not. The Gorgon series just isn't good enough. They all need a buff, basically. On the complete and total reverse, this is number 10 on the top 10, the Prisma Griccata. So, I will say, it was incredibly hard to choose what regular-ass motherfucking machine gun went on the top 10 list, because there's a lot of them that are really fucking close in kill time, in build. There's a lot of them that function incredibly similarly. We got the Tenora, we got the Summer Prime, we got the Prisma Griccata, we got the Baza. There's a lot of them, and they function almost identically. But the one difference is that in general, on the Prisma Griccata, I use Stabilizer, which does, if you can handle the insane recoil, leave room for another mod of your choice. Personally, I will always use Stabilizer on this thing because it makes my headshots so much more consistent that I personally gain damage on this weapon. But if you can handle the recoil, it pushes ahead of the rest. I think that's a very limited amount of people, but it does. So if you really like shooting bullets at people, which, I mean, honestly, that's probably all of us, really, Prisma Griccata, it's a really good pickup from Borrow. On the complete and total reverse of that, the Prisma Tetra is absolute trash garbage, and you should never use it outside of leveling it and then chucking it to the fucking wind. Which you probably won't because you'll want to keep it because you bought it for ducats from Borrow, sadly. MR fodder. The regular Quanta MR fodder. This thing is just not as good as its brother. which is the Quanta Vandal, which we're going to talk about in a second. It uses it's worse. It's just worse. It's just a strictly worse version. And the Quanta Vandal is barely cutting it in the good category as it stands right now. Weapons have gotten a lot better. The alt fire of this thing is really the only thing holding it together, because the alt fire on this with the AoE can be pretty good. That being said, if the power level of general primary weapons gets pushed up anymore, this weapon will probably end up becoming MR fodder unless there is finally a fix to beam weapons to make them able to compete in general with regular bullet-based weaponry, or laser-based weaponry for that matter. These are beams, which is somehow different. But yeah, it's hanging on in the good category, but maybe not for long. Quartz Ack. This weapon is new. I wanted to like it. I did. I wanted to. I wanted to sit here and tell you, hey, this like single shot with little asterisks on it weapon in a primary slot is good, and I like it. And I do like this weapon. I like how it handles. I like the animations on it when you shoot it. But it's just not good. It's not worth investing in. The MR rank is way too high. It's just not. It's not worth it. Makes me sad to say that this weapon is not worth it and that this is MR fodder. But it's just the truth of the matter. It's just the truth of the matter is that it's not good enough. Maybe if the status on this weapon was calculated on a like bullets fired basis as opposed to being calculated like shotguns, which calculated like shotguns as in whenever you fire the 4 bullets out of this weapon, it's the way that it was programmed by DE is that it is multi-shot. It is not 4 bullets coming out of the gun, like say in the case of a burst fire weapon. It is instead... never mind. I'm not going to get into it. It's MR fodder. Sad for me. Things that are not sad for me, the Rakta Ceranos. The Rakta Ceranos comes in at number 10. Almost said number 10. Whoa, losing it. Number 9 on my top 10 list. This weapon, being a bow, I have a slight bias. I am against, in general, slow weapons, because this is a horde game, and in general, you need to kill a lot of enemies. Because of that, even though this weapon and the Dread are technically comparable, the Rakta Ceranos, especially with Hunter munitions, pushes ahead significantly, mostly due to the fire rate of this weapon. Because you can just kill more enemies faster with this weapon because you're shooting more arrows. It is a very, very powerful weapon. And bonus, gives you energy, just because of its passive and because it is a Rakta weapon, giving you energy over time. Really fucking hard to beat a really good weapon that does that. Rubico. So, snipers got buffed up in a pretty significant amount, and maybe with a little bit of hesitation, I'm going to call the Rubico great. Why is that? Because if you point it at something and pull the trigger, it's fucking dead. At any reasonable level, and with the minor exception of the Terrorist without a buff, you're killing anything you shoot this at in one shot. And it has the innate punch through now, which helps significantly. It has a very good scope bonus for the crits, because of Hunter munitions, if you shoot it at something incredibly high level and get a slash proc, that thing fucking dies. It's a good weapon. It's a good in general, and I think it's barely pushing itself into great, because I think this is an excellent like first tool for players to hunt Terrorlists with. That might be giving this weapon just slightly more credit than it deserves, because the reload on this weapon is extreme. But regardless, even if I'm making the wrong call and this weapon is not low great, it is high good at the very least. The Sancti Tigris. So this actually will probably come as a pretty drastic surprise. I'm putting the Sancti Tigris in good. And that's mostly due to it being at Mastery Rank 12. And even though this weapon can kind of handle whatever it wants in the game, it's trying to compete with other shotguns. And it's trying to compete with the Astela, and it's trying to compete with the Archiplasmor, and it's trying to compete with its big brother, the Sybaris Prime, at that kind of MR. So with that, I'm just going to give this thing a good. That being said, it is exceptionally good. And is definitely something that is worth using if you, for some reason, do not have access to the other shotguns. Or if you really need the heal, I guess. The Scourge, what can this weapon do? It can apply status. What do a lot of other weapons do? And also other things. Apply status. The gimmick on this weapon is trash, and this weapon is MR fodder. All it does is apply status, which just isn't good enough anymore. The Secura Penta, boasting the worst Syndicate proc, and just being a Penta, basically. It's just not good enough. It's mastery fodder. The regular Simular. This weapon was never good enough, and the Simulars ate a nerf, so guess what? It's mastery fodder. The regular Snipetron. So, I'm going to consider this weapon mastery fodder, if only because in pretty much every case where this weapon is available, you have the Snipetron Vandal, which is strictly better. So, whereas the Snipetron Vandal is going to be a very good weapon for you, it is a solid sniper rifle. I think there are definitely better options, but if you get a hold of this thing, you could absolutely do worse. Just use this instead of the regular Snipetron. The regular Snipetron is mastery fodder in lieu of the Snipetron Vandal existing, basically. The Sobek. So the Sobek is good. It is a solid shotgun that has had significantly more competition this year for sure. And whereas it is solid and it has a good augment, it has to compete with all the other crazy primaries right now, and it doesn't quite make it into great. The regular Soma also only making it into good. With the exceptional power increase that assault rifles got, the regular Soma doesn't quite rate. Like, it's fine, and you can use the exact same build on the Soma Prime as you would on this, and the Soma Prime is a strictly better one, and as we're about to talk about the Soma Prime is in great, but the little bit of difference matters in this case, whereas before, especially last year, it really wouldn't that much. But definitely this year, you're going to want to get a Soma Prime. And absolutely worth noting, this is, if you have Twitch Prime, you can literally just get this for free from Twitch, so you should do that if you don't have a Soma Prime. Should probably look into that. Probably looking to grabbing that real quick. Stradivari, sadly, with the bump up that in general primaries got, even though Stradivari got a buff, and before the kind of end of year like meta switch up of primaries, I probably would have said the Stradivari is good, but at current, I'm unfortunately for it going to have to put it into the mastery fodder category, which is kind of sad to say, because after its buff initially, I probably would have put it in good, if nothing else had changed around it. The regular Strun mastery fodder. For sure, you're going to dump this thing immediately. The Strun Wraith, on the other hand, also a weapon that was really, really fighting to get into that top 10. This weapon has exceptional status. It is very, very powerful. You can strip armor off of an enemy before they even think about calculating the armor. Oh, there's no armor left. It's gone. Do you use corrosive on this weapon? There's just no armor left. The one thing this weapon lacks is the big damage to back up getting rid of their armor. So even once you get rid of the armor on an enemy, you don't quite have the damage to really get in there and eliminate enemies super, super fast. And with that, the downside of the way this thing reloads is just not enough to push it into the top 10. That being said, obviously this is competing for top 10, and it is a great weapon. But I think it just barely gets eked out of that top 10. The Supra, the regular Supra, has been MR fodder for a long fucking time. Like, unless you're using the augment just to give you energy, definitely you're not using this. And especially in lieu of the Supra Vandal existing. So the Supra Vandal is strictly better version of the Supra. Shock and surprise all around, I know. And because it can give you energy, I'm going to call this weapon good. I'm going to put it in good because the ability of a weapon to give your frame energy is it's a pretty extreme benefit. And it's not like this is like the worst weapon you'll ever hold. I mean, like, you can kill fodder enemies with it. It's really mostly the energy proc, I'm not going to lie. But yeah, if you need a machine gun that gives you energy, this is definitely a way to go. And it's like barely getting into good. Just barely. Just because of the energy. The regular Sybaris. So, at the current time, the regular Sybaris is mastery fodder. I think that will... God, I know a lot of people just got very angry. I think that will change slightly when the Sybaris Prime gets vaulted, but at the current time, I think investing in this weapon is just not worth it, because you're likely to have the Dex or the Prime, making this weapon, for now, mastery fodder. But in like the future case where the Sybaris Prime is vaulted, and maybe if we see some mix-ups to status and things, maybe we could call this weapon good. It's definitely a weapon that if you like burst, you're going to pick it up and you're going to really enjoy it. Are all the people that are really angry that I called the Sybaris like mastery fodder, are they gone? Because this is the Sybaris Prime, and this comes in at number 4 on the top 10 list. So this weapon is very, very good and very, very powerful. This weapon hits like a fucking truck. It has good status, it has good crit, uses hunter munitions. It's very solid. It's a very, very solid weapon that with those slash procs from hunter munitions is absolutely fucking terrifying. It's an incredibly accurate weapon, making getting those headshots for the headshot crit slash proc. It's real simple. It's real simple, and shit fucking dies. The Synapse. So the Synapse, if beam weapons were better and didn't have fucked status, and this weapon had maybe double the range it does at current at base, maybe this weapon would be good. But for right now, this weapon just doesn't really rate, and certainly isn't worth putting Forma into or anything. So, unfortunately, at the current time, this is MR fodder. The Synthoid Simular. So the Synthoid Simular ate a gigantic nerf. An exceptionally large nerf. And there are still people that will technically still use this. They do. And you can kill enemies with this, with Mirage. But that case is extremely specific, and I think that there are significantly better weapons for Mirage to be holding. And this weapon just doesn't rate anymore. It was nerfed to be nothing, and it is nothing. It's mastery fodder. You can get the energy from it. Is that, I guess. The Telos Boltor. This has and will remain mastery fodder. It's a fucking MR12 weapon that should be like MR4, 5 maybe. The Tenora, also one of the fucking machine guns that is just so fucking similar to the other really good ones. This weapon is great, especially since it's buff. The buff to this weapon was rather extreme and maybe a little unwarranted, but it pushes it into the Pantheon where it is competing with the Prisma Tetra, it's competing with the Soma Prime, the Baza, etc., etc. It's great. If you like this weapon, definitely use it. The Tetra, this weapon's fucking terrible. It's mastery fodder. Like, holy shit, this weapon is bad. The Tiburon, as much as I would love to see a Tiburon Prime, this weapon just doesn't rate at all and is absolutely mastery fodder. The regular Tigris. So the regular Tigris, I'm gonna call good, but I think that comes with like a small addendum, which is like, it's more of a starter, I guess. Like, it's like, it is good, but in general, man, there are some shotguns that come up real soon after this, and also the Heck exists. But it is an aside to the Heck, technically, and it's good. If you want a double barrel instead of the quad barrel that is the Heck, then grab this thing. It'll do you good. Speaking of doing you some good, this is the Tigris Prime, and it is no surprise, I think, that this still comes in at number 1 for primary weapons. This thing is a fucking monster. Nothing has changed for this weapon. Nothing. The only thing that has changed for this weapon is that the weapons behind it have gotten a little closer. It is devastating. If you need to kill an enemy, if they need to be dead 5 minutes ago, they were dead 10 minutes ago. Like, if you shoot this at someone, they die, and anyone they've ever met dies. It is so, so powerful. Like, the amount of damage is just obscene in a good way. In like an arousing way, I'm sure, to many people. So yeah, get this. It justifies its MR13 lock. Very much so. The Tonkor. Who remembers when this was good? Do you remember? I remember. Not anymore, sadly. This is mastery fodder now. It ate a stealth nerf, and then apparently that wasn't enough, even though it wasn't really worth using at that point. So then it ate a big nerf. And now, Can't recommend building this thing. 4 Mai used on it, definitely wasted now. But yeah, we can all remember. The Torrid, basically nothing has changed. It was Mastery Fodder last year, remains Mastery Fodder. Vakor Heck, my favorite weapon in the game, to be fair, but still coming in at number 2 on my top 10. It is exceptionally powerful, even more so with Hunter munitions in the mix. It's devastating. The damage of this weapon is getting closer to that of the Sybaris Prime. It's closer. It's not there. And handling-wise, I do like this weapon more. It has the 8 shells. And also the healing proc is quite nice with the AoE. And it does a massive amount of damage. Generally more than you'll ever need. It's very good. I love this weapon. It is probably my favorite primary in the entire game. And for good reason, because it is exceptionally powerful. That being said, the investment, the cost of admission on this weapon is maybe a little high, because for this weapon to be better than the regular Heck, you need some Prime mods, namely Primed Ravage. But, if you've got that, and at the point where you're MR12, you probably do, actually, it is so good, and I would suggest everyone grab the Vectis. So, the regular Vectis, I think this is a weapon where I may be being a little harsh, but I'm going to consider this weapon MR fodder. But if you really need a sniper early, this is a decent one to go for. I would suggest probably waiting the 2 MR and going for the Rubico, personally. But if you really want to love a sniper, you can get this at MR3, even though I think it's MR fodder. It is maybe it X into the good category. Maybe. But I think that it's either me being generous to say that it's maybe in good because I like the Vectis series, or I'm being too harsh on it for not putting it in good. Things that are not a tough call, and this will probably upset like a lot of people. Vectis Prime is my number 3 on my top 10 list. The sniper buff was very good, and this weapon, at current, basically never reloads. And in a horde shooter, where this weapon also now has innate punch through, and also has the damage scaling with the combo, this weapon does a lot of fucking damage, and you can kill hordes with it very easily, and it never needs to reload. And also you can hunt terrorists with this, and it's a generally useful weapon. It's good against everything. Like, there's not a scenario where if I have a Vectis Prime, I'm bummed out. It does exceptionally good damage. The scope in is very good. You can use Hunter munitions on it. It's just a great weapon, which, like, it's also has always been my favorite sniper, but it's just very good. It's just a very good weapon. You should get this. Like, it's just great. I really like this thing. The regular Volcker, on the other hand, is MR fodder. This one, not a toss-up, I think. And if you were going to get an early sniper, I would suggest the Rubico, obviously. But if you really have to get one earlier than that, just wait until MR3 and get a regular Vectis. Because this thing, no. Just no. Just level it and get rid of it. Level chuck. Level it and chuck it. Thankfully, though, we have the Volcker Wraith. Now, the Volcker Wraith has a very unique disadvantage. And that is that with Point Strike, it has a 50% critical chance. So every time you fire this weapon, feels like a fucking coin flip on whether or not the enemy's going to die. So the kill time on this weapon can vary wildly depending on your luck. So unless you're a gambling man, this is not a weapon that I can in general suggest to people. That being said, it can do a good amount of damage. It can 50% of the time. And it's actually slightly higher than 50% of the time because you're doing multiple coin flips because of multi-shot, but you get what I mean. It's good. It is a good weapon, and I think it would be fair of other people to call it great, but for me personally, the coin flippy nature of this weapon really sets it back. And even the other slightly more consistent sniper rifles, they really show, like, it doesn't seem like a lot of percentage difference but it really is whenever the other snipers have that higher crit. Hey, and then we have the Tsar. So the Tsar it's a fucking big giant pirate cannon. And obviously, earlier I said to get rid of the Dragoon and turn it into this, and for good reason. This weapon is good. The only reason I'm going to call this weapon good is because it comes in a little late. And where it has to compete with other things is kind of a fucking tough job for it. This weapon is competing with things like the Astala, and that's a tough call. But that being said, it is very good. It is very high level good, and I would very much suggest anyone get this if for nothing else than the fun factor of an effective weapon. So grab this thing, turn your Dragoon into it, definitely do that. Zenith. So this may be somewhat of a moot point to even like talk about this weapon because I feel as though most players will just never see it with the current login reward system. However, they're going to be changing the login reward system to make it so that players can kind of choose what login reward they're going for. And because of that, there is the potential for this weapon to be able to be gotten significantly sooner. And if that were to come to fruition, which I'm just going to assume it is, this weapon is great. It is very effective. The gimmick is very good. Both primary and secondary fires are very, very useful. The primary fire is very status heavy, and you can strip a lot of armor with it, and then switch to your secondary fire for the really big critical damage to eliminate enemies. It very, very much works like a pretty much strictly better Bratton Prime, which is to its benefit because, as we talked about earlier, Bratton Prime is solid enough. So yeah, if you get this thing, it's definitely worth using, though I will say it can be a little weird. Also, it's absolutely fucking hilarious that this thing is MR5 locked. That is massive comedy to me. And last but not least, the Zouge. So the Zouge is a good weapon and is another weapon in the Harpax kind of position, or rather I should say the Harpax / Attica kind of position, where this weapon is an incredibly good get early. It's very easy to build, and also it's a bow and it's fully automatic. So this weapon is an exceptional early thing to grab for you to be able to do bow only sorties very easily without a super slow bow, essentially. So if you have a Corpus sortie that is bow only, you're not really feeling the burn without the ability to take down nullifiers exceptionally fast. And of course, the Rack de Ceranos has very little to no trouble with a nullifier, but that weapon is significantly higher MR, and new players don't really have access to that. That being said, you can also invest into this weapon, and it will do very, very good damage, especially utilizing, of course, Hunter munitions, coupled with the other statuses on it. Whew. But yeah, that's it. That's the end. That is all of the current primary weapons. I really hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope I edited it down to be a length that is not a gigantic pain in the ass to watch. And the full Warframe roster review should be soon, so I hope you guys look forward to that. And I will see you guys tomorrow. Also, I should just apologize with the whole, maybe Damage 2.5 is coming this month, hey, is Korra coming this month, and, all these other things that DE was saying were going to happen in December, which is the current month as it stands. It became really hard for me to decide if I was going to wait to do these videos, because having a video come out and then the next day a patch hits and completely makes it irrelevant is a little rough, because there's a lot that goes into these. But I hope you guys enjoy it. I hope you guys are ready for the Warframe roster review, which, like this review, I think might make a few people mad. But yeah, I will see you guys tomorrow. Thank you for watching, everybody, and if you're here at the end, welcome to the 1%, I guess.